very much for joining us for our Build Back Better session tonight. So this is the third in the series of Build Back Better sessions, and tonight we'll be talking about rapid transition. As all of you all know, this is a really key issue for Compass and for the world in general. And we've got three brilliant speakers tonight who are going to talk about the big transformative issues to help us build back better and rapidly transition to a post-carbon economy. So I will let them introduce themselves properly, and obviously you'll be hearing a lot about their work and what they do, and you'll get a chance in the breakout sessions to ask them more questions, to ask about how we build on the work that they've been working on and how we spread their brilliant ideas around the country. And we'll also have an opportunity to talk a bit in more detail about what you can do, how you can get involved, and what sort of action you can take. So in order of appearance tonight, we have Hira Khan Adiogan, who's Director of Car-Free Cities at Possible. We have Nicola Round, who's the co-founder and outreach director at Free Cities, which is a network for cities to free them from corporate advertising. And we have Andrew Sims, who's the coordinator of the Rapid Transition Alliance, and he'll be talking about lessons from lockdown. So massive welcome to our three speakers tonight. I will explain a little bit about the format. So unlike other sessions we've done, and those of you who are familiar to our podcast, we're running these sessions in a slightly different way in order to encourage participation and allow you guys to have a bit of time with our different speakers. So after the three speakers, we're going to have three different pitches from the three speakers on their Build Back Better idea. And then many of you will have indicated a breakout group that you're interested in joining. So we'll be opening up the breakout rooms, and hopefully with no technical errors, people will disappear off into their breakout rooms. You'll have about 25 minutes in those breakout rooms, and I'll explain after the pitches what kind of questions you'll be looking at. Grace has very helpfully put a document in the chat, which we can also share again, which is a place for you guys to comment on the things that you hear in the breakout rooms. It's a little space for conversation. It's where you can make notes from your breakout sessions and answer the questions, which we'll be asking you and presenting after this opening introduction. And it's also a little space for you to just comment and analyze and add your thoughts or opinions. You can also use the chat box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And you can use those to raise issues, ideas, converse with other people on the call, and we can also spot any questions coming up as well, which you might want to put to the speakers in your breakout room sessions. So when the breakout room sessions happen, we'll explain a bit about the technical side of that, but we're hoping it's very seamless, and the wizardry of Zoom will allow us to navigate all of that quite clearly. So finally, just to say, this is part of a series of events around Build Back Better. You can find a full programme on Compass website, compassonline.org.uk. Please tweet about the conversation during hashtag BuildBackBetterHow. And finally, as ever, note that this conversation is being recorded to go out on YouTube later in the week. So I think that's all the housekeeping for now. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Hira. And Hira, what is your big idea? Over to you. Tell us all about Car-Free Cities.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. See if this works. There we go. Okay, so there's a problem and it's hiding in plain sight in our cities. Can you spot what it is? So my name's Hira Khan Adiogan. I'm head of Car-Free Cities for the climate charity Possible. Now, amongst some crowds, maybe not this one, you'd expect to hear some gasps like, oh my gosh, car-free, did she just say car-free, car-free? Yes, I said car-free. We're presenting a bold, radical vision of what our cities could look like without cars. So what's the problem with cars? Well, the first thing is that we're in a climate crisis, like actual crisis. To meet our commitments to the Paris Agreement, we need to get our emissions down. Transport emissions are the largest source of CO2 emissions in the UK, and within that, private cars are the biggest source of transport emissions. But although I work for a climate charity, and this is a conversation about rapid transition to a post-carbon society, that's not my angle on this whole issue. I'm a proud East London girl, and cities to me are about communities, they're about homes, they're about lives. And the current way that our cities are structured means that we accept the harm that comes with cars. Car accidents cause over 100,000 casualties in the UK, and 20,000 are killed or seriously injured annually. For context, COVID has killed 40,000 people just this year. But we accept this level of catastrophe every year from cars, as if humans are just collateral damage to the machine. Third is toxic air. It's killing us, literally. 40,000 people die annually from toxic air. Again, compare that to the outrage around COVID. Schools around the country are breathing illegally toxic air, and children in Tower Hamlets, where I am, have a 10% reduced lung capacity, which prevents their lungs from developing properly. The COVID-19 lockdown and the closure of parks and urban green spaces highlighted how access to outdoor spaces is a luxury denied to many people, particularly those in low-income households living in tower blocks. Private cars spend over 95% of their time parked. That means in a place like London, over 50 square kilometres of land that should be available to the public is handed over to those who are privileged enough to own a car. And privileged, you say? Yes, that's the word that I use, because the data shows that the poorest in our cities don't own cars. The poorest people walk or they take bus. The most deprived areas in the country have the lowest car ownership rates. That means that actually we're dying because wealthier people are driving into our areas. They're not even starting or stopping their journeys here, but people in more deprived areas are suffering the consequences. So this is just London as an example. The 10 most deprived London boroughs are in red, the rest are in blue, and obviously there is a trend of lower car ownerships in the more deprived boroughs. And then finally, there's the issue that many of our cities were just not designed to accommodate the vast number of vehicles they now endure. Congested roads, absolute deadlock. The average speed of a car in London is just 7 miles per hour. Drivers waste 8 minutes of each car trip driving around looking for somewhere to park. I mean, it's just not a pleasant driving experience at all. So, what's the vision? Now, it's really hard to imagine our cities without cars, but let me try to paint a picture. So it's 2030, you open your dedicated travel app on your phone and it shows every journey option available, including time and price. You could take a stroll on the strategic walking network that now spans the whole of the city, connecting up town centres via green spaces, wide pavements, trees and benches, water fountains, shops and cafes bustle with customers. Along these routes, pedestrians have right of way. Wherever they are crossed by roads and tracks, the lights default to green for pedestrians and other transport modes have to wait for them to change. Bus. Nearly everyone lives within 200 metres of a bus stop with a regular scheduled service. With the cars gone, the roads are much clearer, halving journey times. All buses are electric and free for locals. Tram and tube. Tram lanes run down every major road. Tram and tube tickets both cost a little, but it's worth it for the speed. Dockless bikes are available everywhere, easily booked and unlocked with your app. Cycle hire is free to annual subscribers, pensioners and under 18s. Protected cycle lanes are everywhere, even down to quiet residential streets, no longer crowded with parked cars. You're a member of your city's independent e-scooter co-op. So scooter journeys have a tiny environmental footprint and they don't mess with your outfit. Car share. So there's still a few cars on the road in 2030, all electric. Most streets have a charging bay or two for the car share scheme run by a regulated co-op to manage overall numbers. There's still plenty of appetite for private door-to-door ride-hailing services amongst wealthier people. So the number of taxi and minicab drivers doubled when private cars were no more. Without congestion, all car trips are much faster, so drivers can turn jobs around quicker and earn more too. Journeys by electric three-wheelers are 4 times more energy efficient. In the outer London boroughs, 3 dedicated school buses are returning from their daily drop-offs in the suburbs. Oh, there we go. where urban sprawl has made it a little harder to meet mobility needs without private cars. Digital route planning means it's simple for these local authority-run services to deliver bespoke, responsive routes based on need. So that's the one that I missed, which is you could summon an on-demand minibus, an 8-seater wheelchair-accessible rideshare that operates like a bespoke, affordable shuttle service, free to those with a blue badge. And finally, vans. Most of the other vehicles on London's roads are electric light goods vehicles, LGVs. Although nearly 3/4 of the deliveries that used to be made by vans were small and light enough to now be made by e-cargo bikes, vans are still needed for tens of thousands of tradespeople, services and utilities going about their business every day. So now I've painted you a lovely picture. How are we going to make this vision a reality? So we want to engage the public to advance medium-term visions of our cities where car dependency is a thing of the past, and to co-design and deliver real-world, bottom-up, practical solutions that reduce motor traffic dominance in the short term. We're working in London, Bristol and Bath, Birmingham and Leeds and York to help local communities to reimagine their own neighbourhoods car-free. So we'll be working with a variety of partners and local community groups to identify strategic sites for parklets, carry out air quality monitoring and citizen science surveys using monitors installed in volunteers' homes and businesses, identify strategic locations for modal filters in residential neighbourhoods, create a toolkit for registering petrol stations as assets of community value, co-create mobility calculators, lobby local authorities and raise policy support for the urban car reduction. The highest ambitions of our governments at almost all levels is achieving marginal long-term reductions in car use, which doesn't go far enough. And finally, share and seek learnings from across the globe. There are examples of smaller European cities that have made radical strides away from car use, and our cities need to be looking towards these exemplars to learn from their wins and their mistakes. Now, I'm sure someone from Possible will shoot me dead if I didn't mention at this point that our current Name Our Lanes campaign has kicked off in London. We name the things we love, but London's cycleways are currently numbered, not named. So to encourage Londoners to feel more love and ownership over their cycleways, we're running a public competition to name our lanes. You can go to our website to submit your entry before Saturday, and you could win a Brompton bike and other cool prizes. We're planning on rolling this campaign out to the other cities we're also working in. So there's a plethora of other activities and plans that we have for car-free cities, including the official launch, which is yet to come. But I've tried to squeeze the where we are, where we want to be, and how we might get there into the tight 8 minutes. And I hope I've been able to inspire some of you to come and explore this further with me. So thanks for listening.
Brilliant, thanks, Hira. I always find it still strange on Zoom that people are not allowed to applaud, but I'm sure people are applauding that. That was fantastic. And I think what was amazing about that is how it made it real. You know, you could really see yourselves in these streets. And in fact, where I live as well, lots of streets are being closed off by planters, and you can see the difference it makes. So it's just, it feels to me like a, win-win-win-win-win example. So, and linking up with other cities around the UK and international examples where, this is an international movement as much as it's anything. So we'll definitely ask you a bit more at the end about, reminding people also how they can get involved and what they can do. And I'm sure people in your breakout group will have many examples of cycling, active travel, car-free city campaigns and opportunities happening where they are. But without further ado, we're going to move over to Nicola. So Nicola, we've been talking a lot also about how the focus on cities and urban planning and design. And I know that your thinking is very much about also freeing cities from the sort of, incessant, ubiquitous corporate influence, which also pushes people towards carbon intensive lifestyles. So can you tell us a little bit about how you've been working in different cities across the UK and especially in Bristol, and also what people can do where they are to make their cities ad free?
Okay, are we sharing? Great. Hi, everyone. I wonder if you noticed anything about billboards and other outdoor advertising sites during lockdown. Usually billboards and bus shelter ads, the paper ones, are changed every couple of weeks, and with new big posters selling us cars, fast fashion, flights, junk food, loans. But back in the spring, it quickly seemed that the multinational corporations were so used to seeing on billboards across our cities and neighbourhoods. They didn't want to use these places during these quieter times when life had slowed down and people were retreating from the world. Adverts went unchanged for weeks or months. I saw a couple of these near where I live, near my home. Billboard posters were ripped and fading. Here's an example of a smaller one in Bristol, which is what it looks like now and has done for weeks. Another thing you might have noticed is that others began to take advantage of this. We saw more campaigns from creative agencies and artists with positive messages of hope and community being spread. A creative agency in Bristol, Rising Arts, worked with a local advertising agency to showcase works by young artists with challenging racism, for example. And then something else happened as we began to emerge from isolation. We saw on some advertising screens there were adverts for advertising, often disguised as attempts to be our friends, to sweeten us back into a world where we accepted unwanted corporate advertising once more. But had we had a taste of a world without corporate advertising, or with far fewer, and with something else hinted at instead? And how did that feel? First, I just want to touch on really what the problem is. Corporate advertising dominates public spaces, in cities in particular, and this kind of advertising, it manipulates us to push products which we don't need, which are really damaging the planet. And these are the dominant messages which we're bombarded with every day. They're from big corporations with access to our attention, where smaller independent businesses or community organisations really don't have anything like this kind of access to this kind of exposure. And outdoor advertising is all around us. It's there without our consent, using sophisticated techniques to make us buy more stuff. The majority of products we see advertised on billboards are those which are driving unsustainable consumption and climate change. Fast fashion, flights, junk food, supermarkets, and cars. And they sell us lies, like these cars driving on a beach, rather than the congested, traffic-filled cities of our real lives. Advertising companies are now intent on transforming their structures into digital screens, which are far more profitable. If you live in somewhere like Birmingham or Manchester or London, you will be used to seeing these. They're designed to attract attention from motorists. They have changing displays which show 6 adverts a minute, and they're even more expensive and exclusive to the big corporations, selling us yet more cars, among other things, and profiting from our already congested cities. Just want to quickly show you this advertising sales pitch to selling space on a digital screen in Bristol, saying Bristol is one of the most congested cities in the country. Most commuters spend a quarter of their journey at a complete standstill. This is a selling point. So these are intrusive, they cause light pollution, they harm wildlife, they use a lot of electricity. And we've become so used to outdoor advertising that we just accept it as part of our street scene. This steady drip of messages constantly telling us to consume. But does it have to be this way? Could we create cities free from corporate advertising? That's the vision that I want to share with you today. Could we get rid of billboards and digital advertising screens? What would we lose? We would lose very little. And what would we gain? Well, the potential benefits are huge. We'd be free from all this unwanted advertising, which I've already mentioned, for cars, junk food, flights, fast fashion, supermarkets, pointless adverts for TV shows, Sky, broadband, financial comparison sites, banks. All of these messages we're bombarded with every day that we never asked for. All of this would be out of our sight and mind. It would be like just a big sigh of relief, like when an annoying noise goes away. And the push to buy more stuff is gone. So this event is about how. So how? Well, it is already happening. We are a network called Ad Free Cities. Our vision is for happier, healthier cities free from corporate outdoor advertising. We launched AdBlock Bristol in 2017 with a vision of making Bristol the first city in the UK to get rid of corporate advertising. And since then, we've seen AdBlock groups emerging in other cities. AdBlock Leeds, AdBlock Birmingham, Cardiff, Exeter, and some activity in London as well. So we launched Ad Free Cities this year to support this growing network. And we're building on history, in the UK, Europe and beyond, of opposition to advertising. And we're inspired by cities who've already gone ad-free. So what do we do? Firstly, it's about holding the line. We spend a lot of our time stopping new advertising. We support local residents to oppose planning applications for new advertising sites. In Bristol, we've been pretty successful, and we're now able to share learning with groups in other cities who are now starting to do the same. We also work to get existing billboards taken down when we can, and we look, following proper channels. And we look for ways in which council policy can change or evolve to address problems with advertising. And we're also seeking reform of the planning system. For example, we really think that councils should be able to reject new advertising schemes on the basis of climate concerns, which under the planning regulations, which are very out of date, they're not currently able to do. So we need reform there. We also produce resources and we hold events to raise awareness of the impacts. For example, our conference next weekend, free to register. We showcase positive alternatives like art. So that's the house. So we get rid of all the billboards. So what do we want there instead? Well, maybe it's nothing. It depends on the community, really. But here's an example from St Werburgh's in Bristol, a community in Bristol who've been successfully opposing billboards for many years. Here's an example. They got rid of these 3 billboards, which were obscuring this lovely Grade 2 listed church, which now the community can enjoy, including the greenery in front of it. We also might want art there instead. So this is a community arts board that we curate in Bristol. This is the latest artwork that's gone up. It's a piece celebrating the life of a grassroots revolutionary, Angela Francis, one of the first Black female DJs in Bristol. Very different from the kind of corporate advertising that used to be seen on this board. Maybe we want to make more space for nature. So we're very inspired by the example of the city of Grenoble in France, which in 2017 removed hundreds of billboards and replaced them with trees and community notice boards. Fantastic. Is that what our cities need? Or maybe we want to make space to have more conversations. Here's an example of an activity that we have run a number of times in Bristol, a very simple activity where we simply cover up an existing advertising space, the one you saw earlier, for a day, which transforms it into a space where people are invited to contribute their own comments, transforms it from a space where people are just passive consumers of corporate advertising to an invitation to actively contribute to what you see in your local environment. So could we repeat this, upscale this, do this in many more places? So here's a flavour, really. I guess what I've tried to do is give you a flavour of how we do it. Let's make this happen everywhere in the UK. What would you like to see instead of corporate advertising in your community? Is it more community messages? Is it support for local businesses, community enterprises, all these fantastic great things that are already happening, to create the more caring and greener future that we need? We'd really like to work with you, to support you to work for an ad-free city or neighbourhood where you live. So I guess in conclusion, what I think we need to denormalise, if that's a word, denormalise corporate advertising. It's become part of our street scene and it's accepted. So many people claim they don't even notice it. But let's send a clear message that our public spaces are not for big corporations to push unnecessary climate wrecking stuff. We can find alternatives and create happier, healthier cities where we prioritise communities, creativity, well-being and nature, not consumption. Thank you.
That's brilliant. And once again, it's just the bringing to life the imagination that it takes to sort of step from where we are now to where we could be. And I think that's what also your presentation shows, and what the work that you do show how small changes all over the place can create big differences, because this is something that's happening by drip, by osmosis all day long. And you say, you said at the end there, people say they don't even notice it. Well, that's kind of the problem, right? Like we're all open to it. We're all, taking it in, sort of, it's going through our skin, it's entering our pores, and we're all, affected by it. But what are the alternatives? And, those inspiring pieces of art. I think I would just be staggered if I saw something like that. In fact, has been quite a lot of also street art I've noticed recently under the pandemic, which has gone up in my area. And people they stop and take pictures, they linger, they make, use of space, which at the moment is public space feels like a space where people feel quite threatened. So making it feel somewhere that's welcoming and inclusive and community specific as well, not just this is an advert which is shown, all over the country and just is completely generic. So super inspiring stuff. And I'm sure people in your group will ask a bit more about how they can start to take action where they are as well, which I think somebody in the group pointed out that not everybody lives in cities, but of course you could do this wherever you live. I mean, high streets in towns and in villages, all of us are still subject to advertising. to a greater or lesser extent. So this is something you could take and implement pretty much anywhere. Brilliant. So moving on to Andrew. So Andrew, I think you're going to tell us a bit about lessons from lockdown, what we've learned, how we can continue some of those things that we have learned during lockdown, and how they all tie up together into this broader push towards rapid transition and making the leap to a post-carbon economy. Over to you, Andrew.
All in 8 minutes, and I've got massively divided loyalties as well, because declaring an interest, I've been working with here on car-free cities, and we also have a campaign called Bavvertising, which ties up very nicely with ad-free cities too, so I could quite happily spend my time just joining in the conversation about what they're doing. But I have a job to do here, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about rapid transition and lessons from lockdown. Rapid Transition is an international group of mostly civil society groups at the moment, around about 100, and their tagline is evidence-based hope. They've been looking at and gathering evidence of examples of change at the speed and scale which will be needed to meet the climate targets. And they focused significantly on examples when, in moments of upheaval driven by all kinds of different circumstances, whether it's economic crises, environmental crises, or other demographic upheavals, where we've demonstrated the ability to change things at speed and scale. And of course, we were set up less than 2 years ago and then stumbled our way into the pandemic earlier this year, and it was kind of a circumstance that we were created for. So for the last 6 months, we've been running an additional project as part of the Rapid Transition Alliance on lessons from lockdown. And we are posing the question about what we can learn from the pandemic crisis to build a well-being economy, a greener, fairer country and world in the face of the climate emergency and the crisis of inequality. And the problem that we've been addressing is that one of the reasons why many of the positions of advocacy for change have not matched up to the scale is that there's been a missing link in believing in the possibility of change. So that's why we're led by real world examples which demonstrate these possibilities for change. This is the evidence-based hope. And if, because I've only got a short time now, there's lots and lots of stories of change and examples. And you can see some of the materials that we've been producing on lessons from lockdown on the Rapid Transition website, which is rapidtransition.org. And I'm going to ask you at the end of my short little session here for you to share your lessons from lockdown as well. We've got a dedicated special little thing where you can film a little video diary and send it to us, and we will share it on your behalf. You know, it's long been said, and the reason for doing this is that it's been long been said that it's been easier to imagine the end of the world than a fundamental change in the economic system. We think this moment that we're living through at the moment demonstrates why that is no longer the case, because far from change being difficult or impossible, it seems that we can turn not just the economy, but our day-to-day lives around almost overnight when there is a will and there is political support for it. And we've demonstrated that we can do that in putting public health and well-being before short-term economic interests. Obviously, these are difficult and contested moments, but there's also a mandate for change. And I think it's really helpful to remember that over 90% of the population living in the UK today are living in areas which have declared climate emergencies. Now, we don't yet have the plans to deliver on those climate emergencies to meet the targets, but there is certainly the mandate for doing it. And the flexibility of the ways in which we can do it have been demonstrated by the way that even the government seems to have signaled that it's okay to break the law in very specific and limited ways. So achieving rapid transition would fit that brief for me. The three themes that we've looked at on lessons from lockdown about the ways in which we have demonstrated that we can look after each other better, the ways that we can create more space for people and nature in the places where we live, and the ways that we can move to a lower consumption lifestyle, having less stuff. We've been talking about denormalizing some of the bad things, decommodifying our lives. And the pandemic has made this point really quite unequivocally that we can put the protection of public health and well-being as a higher priority than short-term economic interests. And we've also seen the ways in which, quite against the theme of the way in which the state has been emasculated, that it's actually got the ability, it's got the capacity to enable and ensure that things happen at scale and speed when it wants to. It can, for example, use its levers to make the banking system service and support the economy, and to even be a wage payer of last resort. But we've also seen the ways in which the pandemic has revealed some deep imbalances and flaws that undermine the possibility of a green and well-being economy, and has laid out an agenda by implication for corrective action. And we've seen this in things that we've touched on already here: the car bias in urban space at the moment, the undervaluing of key workers, and big problems between sort of priorities over sort of wage workers over freelancers, big business over small business, homeowners over renters, etc. But it has revealed this great potential for rapid behaviour change and economic re-engineering. Lockdown itself has shown how we can adapt our behaviour sort of almost overnight, and we've shown extraordinary willingness to turn our lives upside down, voluntarily staying at home to look after each other. But there's been some very specific ways in which we can pick up some lessons from lockdown at a sort of at a larger level as well. We've seen the potential for rapid industrial conversion. We've seen the ways in which everything from vehicle manufacturers to textile makers could repurpose their manufacturing for protective equipment. We've seen the way that everything from brewers and perfume makers have also made protective equipment like sort of hand gels, etc. The way that medical equipment, breathing aids, that car makers have moved to producing that as well. There's been almost on a daily basis, there are interesting examples about people are reacting and responding in live time. Today, there was a story about how the throughput at Heathrow has gone down 84%. And there's a big question over the aviation industry about how it might plan for conversion. Well, there's a story come out in the last couple of weeks about the way in which in Switzerland, its major airline, Swiss Air, has had a deal with its railway, SBB, about retraining pilots to become train drivers. One of the themes that has been constant through lockdown has been about the reduction of unnecessary travel. Now, some of the reasons why we need to do that were laid out very beautifully by Hira. We've also seen the way in which the aviation industry has been implicated as a sort of super spreader of the virus as well, and how air pollution links to morbidity rates. But we've also seen how some of the former advocates for the car industry have stood up and said that we've now entered a period of time in which we will see probably the permanent reduction in commuting for a lot of people. So the head of the AA has been saying things like that. We've been seeing ways in which has liberated us in terms of our time and in terms of reducing carbon and in terms of costs as well. And we've seen how the debate about the reshaping of our neighborhoods is being played out now through the introduction of low traffic neighborhoods, something which has been happening, it should be said, for decades and has been somewhat heightened recently. And there's some interesting politics playing out around that perhaps we can discuss. We've seen the emergence of new patterns of work. Now, of course, not everybody can work from home, and that's an important issue around economic equality there, but many people have, and we've seen ways in which it has sort of liberated time and has enabled us to be relate in a different way to our own families, to our neighbors, and to our neighborhoods, and experience our local communities differently. It's enabled some of us to lead slightly more balanced lives. And we've seen also interesting examples about ways in which, shifts in consumer behavior. Even some of the major retailers at the height of the pandemic, when access to essential goods was an issue, were running campaigns about buying only what you need. That might be an interesting mantra to hold on to as a lesson from lockdown for the long term. We saw the language introduced of using only essential goods and services. We've seen opportunities for reskilling. We've seen a rebirth and rediscovery of the local food economy in a number of neighborhoods. Things which also provide some of the sort of micro-we through which neighborhoods and communities are bound together. Lots of new potential there. We've seen the profound emergence of mutual aid groups at the local level. This is something that we've discussed on several campus calls in our crisis conversations over recent months. But we've seen the way in which the importance of sort of key workers, first responders in situations, and the resilience of communities has sort of come to the fore. We've seen obviously the celebration of key workers and the public domain in different ways. Now, it's one thing to have ritual ways of acknowledging that through applause. It's quite another to embed it in new behaviours and proper economic support for those areas. So there's a new agenda there for the support for voluntary workers, for example. I mentioned earlier the active role of the state. We saw the way in which, when push came to shove, we could implement a solution to street homelessness almost overnight. And there's been a battle to hold on to some of those measures to keep the resources going. Again, it's well discussed now, but the so-called illusory magic money tree, we've seen how that can be found and can be used to underpin the economy in such a way that can keep it ticking over. It can be used more creatively in the longer term as well. There's been problems in the support given to small businesses because it's been on a difficult to repay loans basis rather than a grant basis, which could have a more effective way of underpinning the economy. But that also relates to the way in which there's a reform agenda for the banking business for building back, for the banking system for building back better too. But it's been a useful reminder that the economy more broadly sits on the foundations of a public domain that we all have a stake in, a democratic stake in. And it's important to keep that surfaced, if you like. Now, I'm just going to round off the last couple of observations. One is the importance of ecosystems, the importance of nature, let's give it a more simple name, to our own well-being, our own long-term well-being, and not just in the way in which the degradation of nature played a profound role in the emergence of the pandemic. This term zoonosis, about how through habitat destruction it increases the likelihood of viruses crossing over from habitats, but also the fundamental importance to our well-being of access to green space, which is highly unequal and needs to be improved, but also the way in which the links from air pollution mentioned previously to our well-being. And nature reconnection as a cure in some of the simple ways in which we can do that, and the reorganization of our lives has created opportunities to do that. So that's been another big lesson from lockdown, and car-free cities is a big way in which we can redistribute space for people in nature in cities to achieve some of those goals. Now, there's briefing papers relating to all of these themes on the Rapid Transition website. I'll put a link in the chat box so you can track those down. That goes into more details about some of the very specific practical policies that we could develop from, hold on to and implement directly to deliver that. But I think a couple of big picture things. We need to look for forms in the way that we organize the wellbeing economy that embody some of the values and can deliver on some of these broader social and environmental objectives: mutuals, localized cooperatives, community renewables and food enterprises. And we need to campaign for the economic measures that are going to make the changes economically possible for more people. Those are things like shorter working weeks supported by higher minimum wages and universal basic incomes and access to services, support for caregivers and the voluntary and people working in voluntary capacities. We've got to put people first on our streets, and low traffic neighborhoods is an obvious one of those. Reimagined high streets where some of the empty properties, communities need a kind of a first right to use some of those things. Now, so finally, I'll round up with, I'll put a couple of links into the chat box. We really want you to share your lessons from lockdown, just a 1 or 2 minute little video diary that you can send to us, because people learn from hearing from other people, seeing what people have done and learned practically in their day-to-day lives in a way which you never would from sort of reading long-windy policy reports. But also have a look at some of the examples that we've been collecting. We're shortly going to be launching 3 short films, which are a collection of some of the insights we've had from people to date. Have a look at those and please share them. All the resources that we've done on lessons from lockdown are sort of unbranded, so we really want them to be shared as widely as possible. So with that, because I've realized I've covered quite a few different subjects, I'm really looking forward to discussing this with you in the breakout rooms, and I'm just going to post these 2 links into the chat box now and pause there.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. And I'll give you a second to post those links as well. And I think what's amazing about all the things you covered and the things that Rapid Transition Alliance has been really focusing on is it's been hard during this period to map everything that's happening. So all of us have been both undergoing these changes and experiencing them, and also wanting to keep abreast of new developments, what changes in industry are happening, what's happening in communities, how individuals changing in their behaviour. And I've been fascinated to see some of the stories that have been coming through Rapid Transition about the ways that people have at scale and speed change their operations or change their business model or change their individual lifestyles. And once again, to bring back in sort of Hira and Nicola's points, how many of these can be win-win-wins? How many can also serve the health of the community and increase community cohesion and local ownership and control? and democratic control over these things. How can people feel that they have some say and agency over these changes that are happening, especially in a time of great precarity and a lack of agency for a lot of us, feeling like we're stuck in their homes and having things happen to us? How can we flip that and say, well, actually let's put communities and individuals in charge of what happens to them? So definitely, as Andrew said, contribute your stories to Rapid Transition. Compass is a partner of Rapid Transition Alliance and a member of it, and we're working with Andrew to kind of bring these stories to the fore as well and make them as concrete as possible, because we're really keen to hear that. So without further ado, this is the part where you guys get to be involved, and this is the bit which, cross fingers, all should work with the wonders of technology. So now at this point, we're going to go into breakout rooms. You will have received the survey before the session tonight, where you hopefully indicated a room that you were interested in. If you haven't, don't worry, we'll allocate you one of the rooms. And if you have real problems with the room you're in, or really like to go in another room, do just suggest it. Me and Grace are going to be hanging out in the main room. So if you have any technical problems, you'll reappear back there when you reconnect with the call, and we can reassign you to rooms. So you can see the document that Grace shared at the beginning of the call. And I'll briefly go over the 3 questions that we're going to be asking. So the questions we're really interested in throughout this whole series of events, and we're keeping the questions the same across the different events that we have in this series, is firstly, what about this particular project, campaign, the idea, makes it as an example of the good society in action? So when we use the term Build Back Better, part of the reason for this series has been for us to interrogate that concept. So we've both also seen Joe Biden in the States use it, we've seen closer to home Boris Johnson use it, and we've seen the government kind of take this up. What do we mean when we talk about Build Back Better, and what are the values that these projects and campaigns are demonstrating about the good society we want to see, because it's already here and being built now? Secondly, what really works about this project? So I think from all of the examples we've seen over the, both the lessons from lockdown and the big behavioural changes we've seen, car-free cities, and thinking about cities free of advertising, how do they work, and what's the real nitty-gritty? And that's where you might want to ask your speaker more direct questions about their work, what they suggest, tips and tricks for getting it wrong. And finally, the question of how it could be developed. So for some projects, this might be a matter of scaling it, bumping up, making sure that the national and the international levels are also involved as well as the local. But not every project needs to be scaled like that. Some of them benefit more from being spread or distributed around the country. And how can we just light more fires in different places such that this is happening all over the place? So feel free to already get stuck into the document. You should have access. If you have any problems with that, you can just put a message in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to help with that. So a little bit about the Zoom etiquette in the breakout rooms. Obviously, all of you aficionados of Zoom will know that if you want to speak, you should just put a little H in the chat or use the raise hand function. And our 3 lovely facilitators, Andrew, Hira, and Nicola, will be helping just keep the conversation flowing. So you can ask questions of them. You can also use the chat at the side of your screen as well as the document. But really would like you to see you filling out that document, because we want to see what's happening in the other breakout rooms as well. So for people to have a kind of record of the conversations at the end of it. And finally, we will be in the main room, as I say. If you've got any tech problems, if you end up in the wrong breakout room, if anything doesn't work for you, Grace and I will be there, and I'll float between the different breakout groups as well to just see that everybody's getting on okay. We're going to have 25 minutes or 23 minutes probably around that of the breakout sessions, and we're due to finish those just after 7, so probably something like 7:06, 7:05. But I'll give you a little shout before when we're all about to come together, and you'll be zoomed back in when all of that's done. So Grace, without further ado, do you want to open up the breakout rooms? So finally, just to say that we have a couple of minutes left, and all I wanted to do at this point was just give each of the speakers a chance to say sort of in 30 seconds what's next, what's coming up for them, and what people might want to get involved with. You've indicated a couple of actions that people might want to participate in, but I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and it really is going to be countdown special. I'll start singing this theme tune if we get it wrong, to just flag anything that's going to come up. So let's go in reverse order. So Andrew, you're up next.
On the spot. Okay, so very, very quickly, if anybody is a member of an organization that would like to join the Rapid Transition Alliance, please go to rapidtransition.org and sign up there, because we are scaling and internationalizing, and it's all about sharing the evidence-based hope and building a community of interest around the possibilities of rapid transition, so we can believe in the change, we can visualize it, and we can see the way ahead. Very specifically, if you've got lessons from lockdown, go to the link that I put into the chat box, and please, just if it's just a minute or two, we're really interested in the richness, the granular texture of people's experiences during lockdown, which we want to kind of capture and keep visible from this moment. And with the materials that we've already produced, the unbranded materials, we want them shared. So please share them straight from the website. And that's probably my 30 seconds.
Fab, bang on, that was great. So let's go to Nicola next. Over to you, Nicola.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone in the group for a really great discussion. So the first thing I've got to say is register for our conference. It's next Saturday. We've got 3 sessions throughout the day. We would have had an in-person conference, but we're doing it online. So there are sessions on how we can work with councils to introduce curbs on high carbon advertising. We've got a virtual street art tour and with artists around the UK, Bristol, Leeds, Edinburgh, I think one more. So showing how we can how they are taking back public space from corporate advertising and showcasing art instead. And then there's also a session on banks and how high street banks use advertising as greenwash, and the artists and the groups that are fighting back against those. So sign up for the conference. It's free to register. I hope to see some of you there. And also there's a lot of energy and a lot of passion within this new network. And we'd really love to work with more cities, towns, neighbourhoods who want to create more positive alternatives to corporate advertising. So do get in touch. And as I said in the last group just now, don't underestimate how great it feels to get rid of one billboard.
Yes, yeah, I'm actually quite motivated to go out and just rip down the billboard outside of my house. I'm sure there maybe is more peaceable ways of doing that, but yeah, you have fired me up. Thanks, Nicola. And finally, Hera.
Hello, thank you so much to everyone who was in my group. We had a really interesting discussion. Things you can do to stay in touch is, of course, sign up to Possible's newsletter. Follow us on social media. The Car Free Cities launch officially hasn't happened yet. My local campaigners are starting on Monday, and I'm very excited about that. But if you're working in any of the cities that I mentioned, please do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you and hear what you're doing on the ground. And of course, we've got we had lots of discussion about LTN's low traffic neighbourhoods in our session, and in November we will be publishing a research report on low traffic neighbourhoods and whether they are disproportionately impacting more deprived neighbourhoods, as they have been accused of doing. So we'll have the data to let you know whether that's the case or not. But thank you so much, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. And so firstly, just a massive thank you to our speakers. When I dipped into your different breakout rooms, you were just flowing through this so well. And not only were you asked to be speakers tonight, you were asked to be facilitators and presenters and everything else besides. So a huge thanks to all of you for your time and expertise and your enthusiasm and everything you're doing to advance the cause of rapid transition. So it just remains me to say that this is part of a Build Back Better series, which you'll all know. We've got a few really good further events coming up over the next few days. So tomorrow we're connecting up the community. We've got League of Dagenham Council, Darren Rodwell, Hilary Cottam and Sochez Chowdhury, who's a community organiser and doing some amazing stuff around the UK. On Friday, we'll be looking at democracy and questions of deliberation, hearing about also our climate assembly in the UK. We've got someone there who's helped design the climate assembly, talking about constitutional change and also talking about what we need to do to fix our democracy and how we can build back better on that. And finally, on Saturday, we'll be talking about leadership. So we'll have a bunch of different leaders from different places across the UK who'll be talking about the challenges of leadership at the current moment, but what good leadership looks like and what values and principles good leadership demonstrates. Finally, it remains me to say a huge thank you to Grace, who was our amazing tech wizard in the background, and to Jack, who's been doing social. Massive clap to you guys. Please chip in if you like this discussion. Please just donate towards our Build Back Better conference to help us keep these events free and open to everyone. And finally, if you love what we do, please become a member of Compass. We have bi-weekly podcasts, which are a bit like this, where you can join and have live access as a member, and we have an amazing bunch of speakers coming up over the next few months. So finally, huge thank you to all of you for joining us, especially for this first go of this format. Please enjoy the rest of your, what day is it? Wednesday night. And please do join us for the upcoming events of Build Back Better over the next few days. Thank you very much and good night.